Theron woke to cold sheets and silence. His hand reached across the bed before his mind caught up, fingers searching for the warmth that should have been there. The place beside him was empty. Not just empty. Cold. The kind of cold that meant she had been gone for hours. He sat up slowly, his chest tight with something he could not name. The room was still dark. The fire burned down to embers, and the faintest gray light crept through the curtains. Dawn was close but had not yet arrived. The air smelled wrong. Her scent was fading. Not the gradual thinning of someone who had stepped out for a moment, but the slow, deliberate erasure of someone who had no intention of coming back. His gaze dropped to the pillow beside his. A folded piece of paper sat in the indent where her head had rested. His hand was steady when he picked it up. His heart was not. The letter was short. 5 lines in her careful, steady hand. I came to Thornhaven believing I could earn a place beside you. I was wrong. You chose before I ever arrived, and I was too stubborn to see it. I will not stand where I am not chosen. Do not search for me. There is nothing left here to find. She had not signed it. Theron read it twice. The second time, the paper crumpled in his fist because his hand had begun to shake, and he could not make it stop. A sound tore out of him, low and raw and barely human. His wolf surged forward, slamming against his ribs like a caged thing desperate to break free. The bond in his chest, the golden thread that had connected him to her since the moment they met, was stretched so thin he could barely feel it. Not broken, not yet, but fading, dimming, like a candle carried into a storm. He was on his feet before the sound had finished leaving his throat. The door to her wardrobe stood open. Empty. Not stripped bare in a panic, but methodically cleared. Every dress, every pair of shoes, every personal item removed with the careful precision of someone who had planned this for weeks. Theron tore through the room. Her hairbrush was gone from the vanity. Her books were gone from the nightstand. The small wooden box where she kept letters from her mother was gone. The lavender sachet she tucked beneath her pillow every night, the one she thought he did not know about, was missing from its usual place. She had not fled. She had evacuated. She had dismantled her presence in his life piece by piece while he slept beside her, and he had not felt a thing. He pressed his palm flat against the mattress where she had lain. Still the faintest trace of warmth, or maybe that was his imagination. Maybe he was already inventing ways to hold on to something that was no longer there. The door burst open behind him. Bastian stood in the frame, already dressed, his face tight with alarm. The beta had felt the alpha's distress through the pack bond. Half the castle probably had. She is gone, Theron said. His voice came out flat and strange, like it belonged to someone else entirely. Bastian's eyes swept the room, took in the empty wardrobe, the letter crushed in his alpha's fist, and the devastation written across a face that never showed anything at all. How long? Bastian asked. Hours. Theron's jaw clenched so hard the muscle jumped beneath his skin. She knew the patrol rotations. She knew the gaps in the perimeter watch. She planned every step of this. Because of course she had. Saris had spent 6 weeks learning every inch of Thornhaven, every corridor, every schedule, every weakness in the security she was meant to be protected by. He had admired her thoroughness at council meetings, praised her attention to detail in front of his advisors. He had mistaken it for dedication to the pack. She had been building an escape route while he watched and did nothing. Shu, mobilize every tracker we have, Theron commanded, and his voice cracked on the last word. Every wolf, every scout, every ranger in the territory. I want search parties at every border crossing within the hour. I want riders sent to every allied pack between here and the coast. Find her. Bastian hesitated for exactly 1 second. 1 second too long. Now, Theron roared. The windows rattled in their frames. Somewhere in the corridor beyond, A servant dropped something that shattered against stone. The beta disappeared. Theron heard him barking orders before he reached the stairs, heard doors slamming open, heard the castle waking around him in a rush of footsteps and urgent voices. The machinery of the kingdom grinding into motion because its king was standing barefoot in an empty room and could not breathe. Theron pressed his fist against his sternum where the bond was screaming. The pain was extraordinary, not the sharp, clean pain of a wound that could be treated, but a deep, spreading ache that radiated outward from his chest into his throat, his jaw, the backs of his eyes. His wolf clawed at the inside of his skull, howling with a grief so raw it blurred the edges of his vision. She had been right here. Hours ago, she had been lying beside him in this bed, close enough to touch, and he had slept through her leaving. He had slept while she packed her life into bags and erased herself from his rooms and walked out into the dark alone. He had done this. He did not yet understand how completely, but he knew, with a certainty, that settled into his bones like poison, that whatever had driven Saris from this room, from this bed, from him, he had put it there. The dawn light reached the letter on the floor. The ink blurred slightly where it had been crushed, but one line remained perfectly legible. I will not stand where I am not chosen. 6 weeks earlier. The carriage hit a rut in the road, and Saris grabbed the edge of the seat to keep from being thrown into the opposite wall. The jolt knocked loose a pin from her hair, and a strand of dark copper fell across her face. She tucked it behind her ear with practiced patience and went back to staring out the window at the approaching fortress. Thornhaven was enormous. Gray stone walls rose from the hillside like something that had grown there rather than been built, and the towers caught the late afternoon light in a way that made them look almost golden, almost warm, almost welcoming. Saris knew better than to trust appearances. She was 23 years old, a foundling raised within the Ashford border pack, and as of 14 days ago, the fated mate of King Theron Voss. The bond had manifested at a diplomatic summit. One moment she had been standing beside her father, trying not to look bored during a trade negotiation. The next, the most powerful alpha on the continent had turned his head, locked eyes with her across a crowded hall, and the world had tilted sideways. She remembered the way his nostrils had flared, the way his pupils had blown wide and dark, the way every head in the room had turned to watch the Alpha King stare at a nobody border wolf like the ground had just opened beneath his feet. The bond had hit them both like a physical blow. Saris had gripped her father's arm so hard she left bruises. Theron had gone completely still, his face draining of expression so fast it was like watching a door slam shut. He had not spoken to her for 3 days after that. When he finally did, it was through Bastian, his beta, who had arrived at her family's guest quarters with a formal proposal that read more like a military briefing than a declaration of intent. The mating would take place in 2 weeks. She would relocate to Thornhaven. Her role as Luna would begin immediately. There had been no courtship, no conversation, no acknowledgement that the bond between them was anything other than a political inconvenience that required efficient management. The mating ceremony itself had been a formal affair, witnessed by both packs, sealed by tradition. The night that followed was the only time Theron touched her willingly. He had been careful with her, almost gentle, and afterward he had turned away without a word. By morning the distance had returned, wider than before, as if the intimacy had frightened him more than the bond itself. Saris had signed the relocation agreement with steady hands and a smile that did not reach her eyes. Now the carriage rolled through the main gates, and she caught her first glimpse of the welcoming party assembled in the courtyard. Bastian stood at the front, his expression polite and carefully neutral. Behind him, a cluster of advisors and senior pack members waited in neat formation. To the left, the household staff lined the cobblestones, their faces a mixture of curiosity and cautious reserve. Theron was not there. Karis noted his absence the way she noted everything. Quietly, precisely, and without letting it show on her face. She stepped down from the carriage, smoothed her traveling dress, and offered Bastian a smile. "Welcome to Thornhaven, Luna," the beta said, bowing his head. "Thank you, Bastian. It is lovely." She meant the architecture. She did not mean the feeling of standing in a courtyard full of strangers who looked at her like she was a problem they had not expected. Bastian led her through the main hall, up 2 flights of stairs, and down a corridor that smelled of old wood and beeswax. The rooms assigned to her were adjacent to the king's chambers, connected by a heavy oak door that she was told remained unlocked. "His Majesty sends his regrets," Bastian said as he showed her inside. "He was detained by council matters and will greet you at dinner this evening." "Of course," Sarah said. "Council matters take priority." If Bastian heard the edge in her voice, he was polite enough not to acknowledge it. He left her alone in a beautiful, spotless, entirely impersonal suite of rooms that smelled of nothing at all. No one had lived here in a long time. Dinner was a formal affair in the Great Hall. Saris wore the nicest dress she had brought from Ashford, a deep green that her mother said brought out her eyes, and spent 20 minutes trying to tame her hair into something that looked intentional rather than windswept. She was seated beside Theron at the head table. He stood when she arrived, pulled out her chair, and sat back down without a word. Up close, he was overwhelming. Tall enough that she had to tilt her head to meet his eyes, broad through the shoulders and chest in a way that made the space around him feel smaller. His features were sharp and angular, his jaw hard, his mouth set in a line that suggested smiling was something that happened to other people. He ate in silence. She ate in silence. Around them, the hall hummed with conversation and laughter that did not reach their end of the table. Saris lasted 40 minutes before her nerves got the better of her. "The roast is quite good," she offered. Theron glanced at her. "It is adequate." "The bread, too. Very fresh. It was baked this morning." "Wonderful," Karis said, and the word came out far too bright. She wanted to crawl under the table. His gaze lingered on her face for a moment. Something shifted behind his eyes, too fast for her to read, and then he looked away again. That was the extent of their first conversation as mates. Over the following weeks, Saris threw herself into her Luna duties with a determination that bordered on desperation. She memorized names, schedules, and supply inventories. She visited the kitchens and the training grounds and the pack nursery. She held meetings with the household staff and reorganized the linen stores and personally inspected the infirmary with Era, the head healer, who was the only person in Thornhaven who seemed genuinely happy to see her. Theron remained a ghost, present at meals, absent from everything else. He spoke to her in clipped, functional sentences that conveyed information and nothing more. He never touched her except in public, where he offered his arm with the mechanical precision of a man fulfilling a contractual obligation. The oak door between their rooms stayed unlocked. He never opened it. Neither did she. It was Ira who first mentioned the name, 3 weeks into Saris's tenure as Luna. "You should know," the healer said one afternoon, her voice careful, "that there are rooms in the East Wing that the staff have been instructed not to discuss with you." Karis looked up from the herb inventory she had been reviewing. "What kind of rooms?" Era hesitated. "Private chambers, maintained for a guest of the king." "A guest?" Saris repeated. "Her name is Delphine Renard." The name meant nothing to Saris, but the weight Era gave it meant everything. That night, after the household had gone quiet, Saris walked to the East Wing. The corridor was dimly lit, the sconces turned low as though someone preferred the shadows here. She found the door on instinct, guided by a scent that did not belong to her, something floral and deliberate layered over something else she could not identify. The room was unlocked. Inside, the chambers were beautiful. Far more personal than her own, with soft fabrics and fresh flowers and a vanity cluttered with expensive things. A woman lived here. A woman who was comfortable, who was settled, who had been here long enough to leave her mark on every surface. Saris moved through the space like a woman walking through her own funeral. She touched nothing. She simply looked. And on the vanity, half hidden beneath a silk scarf, she found a healer's note bearing the official seal of Thornhaven's infirmary. The words on the page rearranged her entire world in the space of a single breath. Pregnancy confirmed. 8 weeks. Sarah stood in the unfamiliar room and read the note 3 times. Each reading changed nothing. The words stayed the same. Pregnancy confirmed. 8 weeks. The ink was dry. The seal was authentic. The healer's handwriting was neat and unhurried, the script of someone recording a routine medical finding rather than detonating a bomb in the center of someone else's life. 8 weeks. Saris had been at Thornhaven for 3, which meant this had started well before her arrival, well before the bond, well before the formal mating agreement that she had signed with steady hands while believing, foolishly, naively, stupidly, that a fated bond meant something. She set the note down exactly where she had found it, tucked it back beneath the silk scarf with fingers that did not tremble because she would not allow them to, and walked out of the room. The corridor stretched ahead of her, empty and dim. She made it to her own chambers before the shaking started. She sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her hands flat against her thighs and breathed through her teeth until the trembling passed. Then she stood, washed her face, changed into her nightgown, and went to bed. She did not cry. She was not going to cry over a man who had never given her a reason to believe she mattered. Crying required hope, and hope was a luxury she refused to waste on someone who kept another woman in his house while his mate slept 30 feet from his door. In the morning, she went to Ira. The healer's workroom sat at the back of the infirmary, a cluttered sanctuary of dried herbs and glass bottles and books stacked on every available surface. Ira was older than Saris by perhaps 15 years, sharp-featured and steady-handed, with a gaze that missed very little. "You found the room," Ira said, before Saris had opened her mouth. "You wanted me to. I wanted you to have the truth." Ira set down the mortar she had been grinding and wiped her hands. "Sit down." Saris sat. "Delphine Renard has been at Thornhaven for 4 years," Ira began. She was the expected match before the bond intervened. Her family, the Renard pack, controls the southern trade corridor. The alliance was political, strategic, and very nearly finalized when the king attended the summit and came back mated to you instead. Saris absorbed this in silence. Delphine was not sent home, Era continued. She remained at court as a guest, a permanent guest. The official explanation is that the trade alliance requires her continued presence. And the unofficial explanation? Era met her gaze. The unofficial explanation is that the king never stopped seeing her. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Karis felt the ripples but kept her face composed. "The pregnancy," Karis said. "Is it real?" "I did not conduct the examination myself," Era said carefully. "A visiting healer was brought in from outside the pack. That alone should tell you something." "It tells me someone wanted to keep you out of it." "Precisely." Karis pressed her lips together. "Who knows? The inner circle, Bastion certainly, the senior advisors. And now you." Era paused. "The court suspects, but nothing has been confirmed publicly. Not yet." Not yet. 2 words that carried the weight of inevitability. Saris understood what Era was telling her. This secret had an expiration date, and when it surfaced, the Luna who had been in residence for less than a month would be the last to know and the first to be humiliated by it. "Why are you telling me this?" Karis asked. Era studied her for a long moment. "Because you deserve the chance to decide what to do with the information before someone else decides for you." Saris nodded slowly. She thanked Era, stood, and walked back to her rooms with the posture of a woman who was not falling apart. She changed into her best dress, the deep green one, the one her mother said brought out her eyes. She pinned her hair with particular care. She applied the faintest touch of color to her lips. And then she went to the formal dinner that evening and sat beside her mate at the head table and smiled at every single person who looked her way. Theron glanced at her when she sat down. His gaze lingered for a fraction longer than usual, sweeping over the dress, the carefully arranged hair, the composed expression. Something shifted in his jaw, a tightening she might have missed if she had not been watching. "You look well this evening," he said. "Thank you, Your Majesty." It was the first compliment he had ever given her, and it tasted like ash. The hall was fuller than usual, a celebration of some minor diplomatic achievement that Saris had not been briefed on, which was itself a statement. The wine flowed freely, and the conversation grew louder, and the music swelled from the gallery above. Saris saw her the moment she entered. Delphine Renard was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful. Tall, slender, golden-haired, with a face that belonged on a portrait in a gallery. She moved through the hall like she owned every stone of it, greeting courtiers with familiar ease, touching arms and laughing at jokes and radiating the effortless confidence of a woman who had never once questioned whether she belonged. She was seated 4 chairs from the king, close enough to catch his eye, close enough for conversation if she leaned forward, close enough that every person in the hall could see exactly where she had been placed and draw their own conclusions. Saris kept her smile fixed. She ate. She made polite conversation with the advisor to her right. She complimented the wine and the music and the flower arrangements. She performed the role of Luna with such flawless precision that no one could have guessed the ground beneath her was crumbling. And then, halfway through the 3rd course, Delphine placed her hand on her stomach. It was a small gesture, casual, almost absent, the way a woman might rest her hand without thinking. But the placement was deliberate. The timing was deliberate, and the look she sent across the table, past the advisors and the wine glasses and the flickering candlelight, directly into Saris's eyes, was the most deliberate thing of all. A slow, certain smile. The smile of a woman who had already won and wanted to make sure the loser knew it. Saris held her gaze. She did not flinch, did not look away, did not let a single crack appear in the mask she was wearing. But beneath the table, her nails dug crescents into her palms so deep they drew blood. She glanced at Theron, waited for him to notice, waited for him to see the challenge his mistress had just issued to his mate in front of the entire court. The king was reading a document Bastian had passed to him. He did not look up. Garrus decided she would not break. Not publicly, not privately, not in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, when the oak door between their rooms stayed shut and the silence pressed against her chest like a physical weight. If Thornhaven wanted to watch her crumble, it would be waiting a very long time. She threw herself into her work with a ferocity that startled the household staff. She reorganized the winter supply stores, personally audited the pack's emergency grain reserves, and spent 3 days restructuring the patrol schedules after finding gaps that no one had addressed in over a year. She visited the outlying families who lived beyond the main compound, the farmers and the shepherds, and the aging wolves who had been quietly forgotten by a court too busy with politics to remember its own people. They loved her for it. Not immediately, and not without suspicion at first, but steadily. The common wolves of Thornhaven had not had a Luna who showed up at their doors with medicine and supply lists and genuine questions about their children's names in a very long time. Word spread through the pack like warmth through cold stone. The new Luna remembers. The new Luna listens. The new Luna cares. It was the only thing keeping her upright. Theron noticed, though he would never have admitted it. Garrus caught the signs in peripheral glances and overheard fragments. Bastian mentioned at dinner one evening that the outlying families had submitted fewer grievance reports this month than any month in the previous 2 years. Theron's gaze had shifted to Saris for a long, unreadable moment before returning to his plate. She pretended she had not seen it. She pretended the flicker of something warm in her chest was indigestion. A week after the dinner with Delphine, Saris fell asleep at her desk. She had been reviewing supply ledgers for the northern outposts, cross-referencing delivery dates against weather reports, and at some point the numbers had blurred together and her head had tipped forward onto her folded arms. She woke to the weight of something warm settling across her shoulders. She kept her eyes closed on instinct, her body tense with the sudden awareness of another presence in the room. The scent hit her first. Cedar and wood smoke and something darker beneath, the unmistakable signature of her mate. Theron draped his coat over her with a care that did not match anything she had seen from him in weeks. The leather was warm from his body and heavy across her back. She felt his hand hesitate near her hair, hovering, not quite touching, before pulling away. He stood there for a moment longer than necessary. She could hear him breathing. She could feel him looking at her. Then his footsteps retreated. The door clicked shut. Karis opened her eyes and pressed her face into the collar of his coat and breathed him in, and hated herself for the way it made the ache in her chest ease, just slightly. She hated herself more for the thought that followed unbidden. He smells like home. She wore the coat back to her rooms. She told herself it was because the corridors were cold. 3 days later, she attended a council meeting to present her findings on the supply gaps. Lord Morvain, a senior advisor with a voice like grinding gravel and opinions about women that belonged in a previous century, interrupted her twice in the first 5 minutes. "With respect, Luna," he said, leaning back in his chair with a smile that contained no respect at all. "Perhaps these logistics concerns would be better handled by someone with more experience in administrative matters." Saris opened her mouth to respond. "She has more experience in administrative matters than you, Morvain." Theron's voice cut through the chamber like a blade through silk. Quiet, controlled, and utterly final. "She reorganized in 3 weeks what you failed to address in 3 years. Let her finish." The silence that followed was deafening. Lord Morvain's face went the color of old brick. Every advisor at the table became suddenly fascinated by the documents in front of them. Sarah stood very still, her heart hammering against her ribs, unable to look at Theron because she was afraid of what her face might reveal if she did. She finished the presentation. Her voice did not waver. Afterward, in the corridor, she allowed herself 10 seconds of fierce private triumph before the confusion set in. He had defended her. In public, in front of his entire council, he had chosen her authority over a man who had served the crown for decades, but he still kept another woman in his East Wing. He still slept on his side of an unlocked door he never opened. He still had not touched her once outside the obligatory arm at formal dinners. What did it mean? What did any of it mean? It meant something. It had to mean something. The cracks in his armor kept appearing after that, small and unpredictable and impossible to ignore. He started attending meals more regularly when she was present. He asked her opinion on a territorial dispute with the Eastern Pax, listened to her answer with his full attention, and implemented her suggestion without alteration. One evening, passing her in the corridor, he paused and said, "The families in the North Valley sent a formal letter of thanks, addressed to you specifically. It was well earned." His ears had gone slightly red when he said it. Saris had stared at him, caught completely off guard, and managed only, "That is kind of them." "It is not kindness," Theron said. "It is recognition. There is a difference." He had walked away before she could respond, which was fortunate because she had no idea what she would have said. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Saris felt the hope growing despite every effort to kill it. tender, persistent, and completely irrational hope that sprouted in the spaces between his silences and fed on the smallest scraps of warmth. Her wolf stirred every time he was near, pressing forward beneath her skin, reaching toward him in a way that Ceres could not control, no matter how hard she tried. She started to believe she could survive this, that the bond between them, battered and neglected as it was, might still become something real, that maybe, eventually, the oak door would open from his side. Then the night came that ruined everything. Ceres could not sleep. The insomnia had been getting worse, a restless, crawling energy beneath her skin that her wolf would not let her ignore. The nausea had started too, subtle at first but growing more persistent, settling in her stomach each morning like an uninvited guest. She told herself it was stress. She did not believe herself. She rose from bed, pulled on a robe, and walked. The castle was quiet at this hour, the corridors lit only by the low flicker of wall sconces. Her bare feet were silent on the stone. She did not choose a direction. She simply moved, letting her body carry her wherever it wanted to go, and it carried her toward his study. She heard his voice before she reached the door. Low, measured, unmistakably his. And then Bastion's. Quieter, cautious. Ceres stopped. The door was slightly ajar, a thin line of firelight spilling across the floor. She should have turned around. She should have walked away and pretended she had heard nothing. Every instinct told her that whatever was on the other side of that door would hurt her. She did not turn around. "The child is mine." Theron's voice was flat, stripped of emotion, delivering the words like a verdict. "I will not deny it. Delphine will be provided for. She will have rooms, security, and full access to the healers. And I expect the Luna to accept this arrangement without conflict." Bastion said something too low for Ceres to hear. "She will have to accept it," Theron replied. "The Renard alliance depends on it. The southern corridor cannot be destabilized over a personal matter." A personal matter. Ceres pressed her back against the cold stone wall and covered her mouth with her hand to keep the sound inside. Her chest felt like something had cracked open, and all the warmth was pouring out. Not because of Delphine. She had known about Delphine. She had prepared for Delphine. But the coat on her shoulders, the public defense in front of the council, the quiet, well-earned in the corridor with his ears turning red. She had let herself believe those things meant she was more than a political inconvenience occupying one side of an unlocked door that no one ever opened. She had let herself hope, and hope, it turned out, made the fall so much worse. Ceres walked back to her chambers on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. She closed the door behind her, leaned against it, and slid to the floor. She pressed both hands flat against her stomach. 2 weeks. She had suspected for 2 weeks now, the nausea every morning, the exhaustion that went beyond sleeplessness, the way certain scents had become suddenly unbearable while his had become the only thing she craved. She had not told anyone, not Era, not her mother, not a single soul in Thornhaven, and she would not tell him, not now, not ever. Because she refused to become the second woman in this castle carrying his child and begging for his attention. She refused to compete for scraps of affection from a man who called their bond a personal matter in the same breath he used to provide for his mistress. Ceres pressed her forehead against her knees and let the tears come. Just this once. Just tonight. In the morning, she would begin planning. Ceres went to Era the next morning and closed the door behind her. "I need you to confirm something," she said. "And I need it to stay between us." Era studied her face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there made her set down her work immediately. "Sit down." The examination was quick, thorough, and silent. Era's hands were warm and steady against Ceres's abdomen, her expression focused in a way that gave nothing away. When she finished, she washed her hands, dried them on a cloth, and turned back to Saris with eyes that held equal parts concern and tenderness. 4 weeks, Era said. Maybe closer to 5. Early, but certain. Karis nodded. The confirmation settled over her like a stone sinking through water. She had known already. Her body had been telling her for days in ways she could no longer dismiss, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that tightened her throat. "You are not surprised," Era observed. "No." "And the king?" "Does not know," Saris said, "and will not know." Era's expression shifted. "Saris, you cannot keep this from your mate. The bond alone will—" "The bond?" Saris interrupted, and the word tasted bitter. "Has done very little for me so far." She pressed her palms flat against her knees. "He called us a personal matter, Era. He told Bastion he expects me to accept his mistress and his child without conflict. I will not beg for space in a life where I have already been replaced." Era was quiet for a long time. Then she crossed the room and pulled a small glass vial from a locked cabinet. Inside, a residue clung to the walls, dark and faintly iridescent. "I need to show you something," Era said. "I have debated whether to tell you, but given the circumstances, you deserve to know." She held the vial up to the light. "This is nightbloom extract. Combined with valerian root and a specific compound derived from wolfsbane in very small controlled doses, it creates a suppressant. Not a poison. Something subtler. It mutes the bond." Saris stared at the vial. "Mutes it how?" "It dampens the emotional connection between mates. Dulls the pull. Makes it easier for an alpha to resist the instinctive need to be near his bonded partner." Era set the vial down. "I found traces of this compound in a wine decanter in the king's study 3 days ago. I went looking because the bond between you and the king is behaving abnormally. By now, at this stage of a mating, the connection should be deepening. Instead, it has barely progressed." The room seemed to tilt. Saris gripped the edge of the examination table. "Someone has been drugging him," she said. "Someone has been suppressing the bond," Era corrected. "The effect is not total. It cannot override a fated bond entirely, but it can dull it enough that an alpha who is already guarded, already reluctant, already fighting his own instincts for political reasons, might not realize what is happening." "Delphine," Saris whispered. Era held up her hand. "I cannot prove the source. I can only tell you what I found and where I found it. Draw your own conclusions." Karis drew them. The conclusions assembled themselves with the mechanical precision of a trap snapping shut. Delphine had access to the castle. Delphine had been here for years. Delphine had every reason to keep the bond between Theron and his Luna as weak as possible. "If the suppressant were removed," Karis asked slowly, "what would happen?" "The bond would reassert itself. Rapidly, possibly painfully. Everything he should have been feeling for weeks would hit him at once." Karis closed her eyes. For one agonizing moment she let herself imagine it. Theron waking up to the full force of the bond. Theron realizing what he had been missing. Theron reaching for her. Then she opened her eyes and let the image die. "It does not change what he said," Karis told Era quietly. "Even if the bond was suppressed, his words were his own. He chose to provide for Delphine. He chose to call me a personal matter. The suppressant may have dulled what he felt, but it did not put those words in his mouth." Era looked at her with something close to grief. "What are you going to do?" "Leave." The word hung in the air between them. Era did not argue. She did not try to convince Saris to stay. She simply nodded, slowly, and said, "Then let me at least make sure you are strong enough to travel." The planning took 2 weeks. Saris was meticulous. She studied the patrol rotations under the guise of her Luna duties, noting every gap, every shift change, every blind spot in the perimeter watch. She packed slowly, removing one item at a time from her rooms so the absence would not be noticed. She wrote letters to the outlying families she had grown to care for, sealed them, and left them with Era to deliver after she was gone. She told no one except Era. Not the household staff who had grown fond of her. Not the families in the outlying settlements who had begun to rely on her visits. Not the kitchen woman who saved her an extra roll each morning because she had noticed Saris was eating for more than herself, though she never said so aloud. Saris severed each connection with surgical precision and hated herself for every cut. She did not write a letter to Theron until the very last night. That night, she sat at her desk in the dark, the words refusing to come. She wrote and crossed out and wrote again, and every version sounded either too angry or too sad or too honest. One draft ran to 3 pages. She burned it. Another was 2 sentences long and so bitter it made her own stomach turn. She burned that one too. She settled on 5 lines. Brief, controlled, final. The kind of letter that said everything by saying almost nothing. She folded the paper and placed it on his pillow. Then she heard the oak door open. Karis froze. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, dressed for travel, her packed bag hidden beneath the frame. The door between their rooms, the door he had never once opened, swung inward on silent hinges. Theron stood in the doorway. He did not step inside. He stood there in the half-dark, his silhouette broad and still against the faint glow from his chambers behind him. She could not see his face. She could not read his expression. But she could feel something through the bond, thin and muted as it was. A tremor. An ache. Garrus closed her eyes and forced her breathing to steady. She prayed he could not hear her heart hammering. She prayed he would think she was asleep. He stood there for what felt like an eternity. She could hear him breathing. She could feel the weight of his gaze. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he whispered, "I am sorry, Saris." The words landed like a blade between her ribs. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted iron. She did not move. She did not open her eyes. She did not breathe. The door closed. His footsteps faded. Saris pressed her fist against her mouth and cried without making a sound. Then she stood, shouldered her bag, and walked out of Thornhaven before the sun rose. By the time Bastian returned to the king's chambers with the first search reports, Theron had destroyed most of the furniture. The wardrobe doors hung off their hinges. The bedside table was in pieces. A chair lay in the corner with 2 of its legs snapped clean off. The king stood in the center of it all, breathing hard, his knuckles split and bleeding, and the look in his eyes made Bastian stop 3 paces inside the door. "Nothing yet," the beta said carefully. The Eastern Patrol found no trail. She avoided the main roads entirely. Theron said nothing. His chest heaved. The bond in his sternum was a raw, screaming wound, and every passing hour stretched it thinner. "The Southern Scouts are expanding their radius," Bastian continued. "We have riders at every border post between here and the coast. If she crosses into Allied territory, we will know." "She planned this for weeks," Theron said. His voice scraped hollow. "She will have accounted for the border posts." Bastian hesitated. "She learned the patrol rotations from the scheduling reports, the ones you gave her access to." The silence that followed was savage. "I gave her the tools to leave me," Theron said. "I praised her thoroughness while she mapped every exit in the kingdom." Bastian did not confirm or deny this. He had the good sense to remain absolutely still. The first day passed with no word. The second day was worse. By the third, the pack had begun to feel the effects. An alpha's bond with his Luna was not a private thing. It radiated outward through the pack bonds like roots through soil, stabilizing, grounding, connecting. When the Luna vanished, the pack felt the severance like a limb going numb. Tempers frayed. The training yard erupted in 3 separate fights before noon. Children became restless and agitated, clinging to their mothers, waking from nightmares they could not explain. The kitchen staff reported that nothing tasted right. that the food had gone flat and strange, and no one could explain why. The elderly wolves in the outlying settlements, the ones Saris had visited most often, sent messages to the castle asking where the Luna had gone, asking when she would come back, asking if she was all right. Bastian intercepted the letters before Theron could see them. It was the only mercy he could offer. Theron did not sleep. He sat in his study and stared at patrol maps and reread her letter until the creases in the paper threatened to tear. He held the coat she had worn that night, the one he had draped over her shoulders weeks ago, and pressed it to his face. Her scent was almost gone. Each hour erased a little more of her, and the terror of losing it entirely kept him awake when exhaustion should have pulled him under. He stopped eating on the second day. He stopped speaking to anyone except Bastian on the third. On the fourth morning, he caught his reflection in a cracked mirror and did not recognize the man staring back at him. On the fourth day, Era came to his study and shut the door behind her with the deliberate calm of a woman who had decided that politeness was no longer a priority. "We need to talk," she said. "I have nothing to discuss with you," Theron replied without looking up. "You have everything to discuss with me." Era set a glass vial on his desk. The dark, iridescent residue caught the light. "Do you know what this is?" Theron glanced at it. "No." "It is night bloom extract. Combined with valerian root and a derivative of wolfsbane, it creates a compound that suppresses the mate bond. I found it in your wine decanter." The king went very still. "Someone has been drugging you," Era said. "For weeks. Likely longer. The compound dulls the bond, mutes the emotional connection, makes it possible for a mated alpha to function as though the bond barely exists." Theron's hand closed around the edge of the desk. The wood groaned under his grip. "The effects are subtle," Era continued. "You would not have noticed. You would have attributed the emotional distance to your own nature, to the political pressures of the mating, to 100 rational explanations that all felt more plausible than the truth." "Who?" Theron said. The single word came out as a growl so low it vibrated through the floor. "I cannot prove the source definitively, but the compound was in your private decanter, the one kept in your study, the one that only you and a very small number of people have access to." Theron stood. The chair scraped back against the stone. His eyes had gone dark in a way that made Era take a small, involuntary step backward. "Delphine had access to this room," he said. Era met his gaze steadily. "She has visited your study regularly for over a year, often when you were not present." The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Theron pressed both hands flat against the desk, his head bowed, his shoulders rigid. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely recognizable. "The things I said about Saris, calling her a personal matter, telling Bastian to make her accept the arrangement." He paused, and the next words came out like they were being pulled from him by force. "I felt those things. I believed them in the moment. How much of what I felt was real?" "The suppressant does not create feelings," Era said carefully. "It removes them. Everything you failed to feel for your mate, every instinct you ignored, every moment of warmth that should have overwhelmed you but did not. That was the compound at work. But the coldness, the distance, the political calculations, those came from the part of you that remained when the bond was stripped away." Theron flinched as though she had struck him. "She knew," he said. "Saris knew about the suppressant?" "I told her. 2 weeks before she left. And she left anyway. She left because even knowing someone had interfered with the bond, your words were still your words." Era paused, letting the truth of it settle. "She said the suppressant did not put those words in your mouth. She was right." Theron closed his eyes. The full weight of what he had done, what he had allowed to happen, what he had failed to see, pressed down on him with a force that made breathing feel like an act of will. "There is one more thing," Era said quietly. Ceres is pregnant. The sound that left Theron's throat was not human. It was the anguished howl of a wolf that had just discovered the depth of its own devastation. His legs gave out. He caught himself against the desk, his arms shaking, his forehead pressed against the wood. His mate had left him. His mate was carrying his child. His mate had walked into the dark alone rather than stand beside a man who had called her a personal matter. And she had kept it from him, not out of spite, but because she refused to use their child as leverage for his attention. The dignity of it crushed him more completely than anger ever could have. "Find her," he said into the desk, and his voice broke completely. "Please, I do not care what it takes. Find her." On the 5th day, Bastian brought him to Delphine's chambers. The confrontation was brief and terrible. Theron did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He presented the vial, the evidence, and the healer's analysis with the cold precision of a king delivering a sentence. Delphine did not deny it. She sat in her beautiful room surrounded by her beautiful things and looked at him with defiance rather than remorse. "The Renard alliance required stability," she said. "Your bond with that girl was an inconvenience." "That girl is my mate," Theron said, and the words sounded different now, heavy with a meaning they had never carried before. "She was no one," Delphine replied, "a border wolf with no name and no standing. The alliance with my family secured your southern corridor." "And the pregnancy?" Something shifted in Delphine's face, the first crack in the armor. "The pregnancy is real." "And the timing? Convenient enough to anchor your position before the bond could solidify?" Delphine said nothing. "You are leaving Thornhaven tonight," Theron said. "Your family will be informed of the terms. The child, when it arrives, will be provided for. But you will not set foot in this castle again." He turned and walked out. He did not look back. There was no satisfaction in it, no vindication. Only the crushing awareness that he had allowed this to happen, that the woman he was supposed to protect had been driven from her home while he slept behind a door he never opened. A door he had finally walked through on the very last night, when the bond suppressant had thinned just enough for something to break through, just enough for him to stand in her doorway and whisper an apology she could not accept. Too little, too late. The words that would follow him for the rest of his life. On the 6th day, Bastian found him in Ceres's empty rooms. The king was sitting on the edge of her bed, holding the lavender sachet she had accidentally left behind. It had slipped between the mattress and the wall, too small to notice in the dark, too hidden to pack. He was pressing it to his face and breathing like a man trying to memorize something before it disappeared forever. "The outlying families are asking about her," Bastian said from the doorway. "The ones in the North Valley. They want to know when the Luna is coming back." Theron made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had contained any joy. "What do I tell them?" Bastian asked. "Tell them their Luna is the bravest person in this kingdom," Theron said, "and that their king did not deserve her." On the 7th day, a scout returned with a trail. Faint, days old, leading northeast toward the border highlands. Theron took the fastest horse in the stable and rode. He did not take guards. He did not take supplies. He rode until the horse foamed beneath him, and the bond in his chest pulled him forward like a rope tied to his ribs. Garrus had made it further than anyone expected. The border highlands were harsh terrain, rocky and wind-scoured and dotted with small settlements that clung to the landscape like stubborn weeds. She had traveled on foot for 3 days before the bond pain became too severe to continue. Her wolf, already agitated, had grown frantic in the absence of her mate. The nausea had worsened. The exhaustion had deepened into something that went beyond tired and lodged itself behind her eyes like a weight she could not put down. She collapsed on the outskirts of a village called Brannock's Hollow on the 4th morning. A woman named Fenella, silver-haired and sharp-eyed with the calloused hands of someone who had worked the land her entire life, found her on the path, and half carried her inside. "How far along?" Fenella asked, pressing a cool cloth to Saris's forehead. 5 weeks, Saris managed. "Maybe 6 now." "And the father?" Saris closed her eyes. "Not here." Fenella did not press. She fed Saris broth and bread and tucked her into a narrow bed in a room that smelled of dried rosemary and wood smoke. The kindness of it, the simple, uncomplicated care of a stranger who expected nothing in return, broke something in Saris that she had been holding together through sheer force of will. She cried for the first time since the night she left, not the silent, controlled tears she had permitted herself in Thornhaven. Real crying, the kind that came from the gut and left her hollowed out and shaking. Fenella sat beside her and said nothing. She simply waited, her hand resting on Saris's shoulder until the storm passed. The days blurred together after that. Saris slept and woke and ate what she could keep down and tried to rebuild her strength. The bond ached constantly now, a deep, pulling pain in the center of her chest that flared when she thought of him and subsided only slightly when she managed not to. Her wolf paced restlessly beneath her skin, pressing toward the southwest, toward Thornhaven, toward him. She ignored it. She had made her choice. But the pain was getting worse. The village healer, a quiet man named Aldrich, who had gentle hands and worried eyes, examined her on the 5th day and pulled Fenella aside afterward. Saris heard fragments through the thin walls. The bond strain is affecting the child. If she does not reconnect with her mate soon, or if the bond continues to deteriorate. "How long?" Fenella asked. Aldrich did not answer. The silence was answer enough. On the 8th morning after her departure from Thornhaven, Saris woke to the sound of hooves on the village road, heavy, fast, and urgent. She pulled herself upright in the narrow bed, her heart suddenly hammering. The door opened. Fenella stood in the frame, her expression unreadable. "There is a man outside," she said. "A very large man, on a very tired horse. He says he is the king." Karis's breath left her body. "He looks terrible," Fenella added. "I have rarely seen a man so destroyed and still standing." "I do not want to see him," Saris said, but her voice shook, and her wolf surged forward so hard she nearly doubled over. Fenella studied her for a long moment. "Child," she said gently, "I have lived a long time. Long enough to know that the things we do not want are sometimes the things we need most." She paused. "I will tell him to wait, but he does not look like a man who is capable of waiting much longer." She left. Garrus sat in the bed and pressed her hands to her stomach and tried to breathe. He waited. An hour. Then 2. Fenella brought him water. He did not touch it. He sat on the wooden bench outside the cottage door with his head in his hands, and Saris could feel him through the bond like a heartbeat that was not her own. The golden thread between them, stretched and fraying for weeks, hummed with his proximity. Not muted, not suppressed. Raw and bright and agonizing and real. Finally, because the pain of his nearness was somehow worse than the pain of his absence, she opened the door. Theron stood immediately. He looked like a man who had not slept in 8 days, which was precisely what he was. His clothes were road-worn and filthy. His face was gaunt, the sharp angles of his cheekbones more pronounced, the shadows beneath his eyes so deep they looked bruised. His hands hung at his sides, clenched and unclenched, and his eyes locked onto her face with a desperation that stole her breath. "Before you speak," Karis said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected, "you should know that nothing you say will undo what was done." "I know," he said. His voice was hoarse, wrecked, stripped of every pretense of authority. "You called me a personal matter." "I know." "You kept her in your home, in rooms nicer than mine, while I slept alone behind a door you never opened." "I know." His voice cracked. "Saris, I know." Then what are you doing here? He took a breath that shuddered through his entire body. Era found night bloom extract in my wine, a bond suppressant. Someone has been dosing me for weeks, probably months. It muted the bond, dulled what I should have felt for you. He swallowed hard. Delphine admitted to it. She is gone from Thornhaven. Karis felt the ground shift beneath her. She gripped the doorframe. The suppressant did not make me cold, Theron continued, and each word clearly cost him. It removed what should have stopped me from being cold. The warmth, the pull, the instinct that should have told me every single day that you were the most important person in my life. That was stolen from me, and I did not fight for it because I did not know it was missing. But the words were still yours, Karis said. A personal matter. She will have to accept it. Those words came from you. Yes, Theron said. They did. And I will carry them for the rest of my life. He took a step closer, then stopped, as though afraid she would retreat. I am not here to make excuses, he said. I am here because you are my mate and you are carrying my child, and I let you walk away in the dark because I was too broken to see what I had. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to let me earn the right to stand beside you, however long that takes. Sarah stared at him. The bond between them blazed, fully unshackled for the first time since they had met, and the force of it nearly knocked her sideways. She could feel everything now. His grief, his fury at himself, his terror that she would send him away. And beneath it all, so deep it seemed woven into the fabric of who he was, a love so fierce it burned. She pressed her hand to her stomach. His gaze followed the movement, and the expression that crossed his face was one she would never forget. Wonder and devastation and desperate tenderness all collapsing into each other. I am not coming back for you, Karis said quietly. I am coming back for my pack. The families in the North Valley still need their Luna. The infirmary supply chain is a disaster without me, and Lord Morvain will undo everything I built within a month if someone does not keep him in line. Theron stared at her. His eyes were wet. But if you want to ride beside me, she continued, you will ride behind, and you will earn every single step of the way home. Something broke open in his face. Relief and grief and gratitude all tangled together in an expression that made him look, for the first time since she had known him, completely and entirely human. Yes, he said. Whatever you need. Yes. Karis turned and walked back inside to pack her things. She closed the door behind her, leaned against it, and pressed both hands over her mouth. The bond hummed warm and golden in her chest. Through it, she could feel him still standing on the other side of the door. Waiting. Not leaving. She let herself breathe. Just this once, she let herself believe it might be enough. The road back to Thornhaven took 3 days. Sarah set the pace. Theron rode behind her, exactly as she had demanded, on a horse borrowed from Fenella's neighbor. He did not complain. He did not try to ride beside her. He did not push. He simply followed. The first day was silence. Not the cold, weaponized silence of Thornhaven, where every unspoken word had carried the weight of things neither of them would say. This was a different kind of quiet. Watchful, careful. The silence of two people who had broken something important and were not yet sure if the pieces could fit back together. Saris could feel him through the bond. Now that the suppressant was gone, the connection between them was almost overwhelming. Every emotion he felt bled through to her in waves she could not block. Grief, shame, a desperate, aching tenderness that he directed at her back like he was afraid to let it reach her directly. And fear, constant, low-grade fear that she would change her mind. She did not tell him it was the same for her. That feeling him this clearly after weeks of muted silence was like stepping from a dark room into full sunlight. that her wolf had stopped pacing the moment he sat down outside Fenella's door and had not settled since. On the second morning, he spoke first. "The door," he said. They had stopped beside a stream to water the horses. He was standing a careful distance from her, the way he had maintained all day, close enough to hear but far enough to respect the boundary she had drawn. "Between our rooms. I need you to know that I stood on my side of it every night for the first 2 weeks you were at Thornhaven." Saris looked at him. "I would stand there," he continued, his voice rough, "and I would put my hand on the wood, and I would try to understand why I could not bring myself to open it. Every instinct told me to go to you. Every part of me that was still mine beneath the suppressant was screaming to open that door, and I could not do it." "Because of the night bloom," Saris said. Theron shook his head slowly. "The night bloom made it easier to resist. But the resistance was mine." He met her eyes, and the honesty in his gaze was almost painful to witness. "I was afraid. Before the suppressant, before Delphine, before any of it. I have been afraid of the bond since the moment it manifested." Saris had not expected that. Afraid of what? Of needing someone. The words came out like they had been locked behind his teeth for years. "My entire life has been built on control, on being the one who does not flinch." The bond took that away in a single moment. One look at you across that hall and I felt the ground disappear beneath me, and I have been trying to get it back ever since. He sat down on a flat stone by the water's edge, his elbows on his knees, his head bowed. "The suppressant did not create the walls, Saris. It reinforced the ones I had already built. And I let it because being numb was easier than being terrified." The silence between them filled with the sound of the stream and the wind through the grass. Saris stood very still, her hands resting on her stomach, feeling their child stir faintly beneath her palms. "You do not get to blame the poison for everything," she said quietly. "Some of those walls were yours." "I know. And some of the damage is yours regardless of what Delphine did." "I know that too." "Good." She paused. "Because I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without turning it into your guilt." He lifted his head. Saris sat down across from him, the stream between them, and for the first time in weeks, she let him see her face, without any mask at all. "I almost did not leave a letter," she said. "I almost disappeared completely. No note, no explanation, nothing. I wanted you to wake up and find nothing at all, because that is what it felt like being your mate, like I was nothing at all." The pain that crossed his face was extraordinary, but she held up her hand. "I am not saying this to hurt you. I am saying it because you need to understand what I was carrying. My parents left me on the steps of the Ashford Pack when I was an infant. No letter, no explanation, just a baby wrapped in a blanket on a cold morning." She swallowed hard. "I spent my entire life trying to be useful enough, good enough, necessary enough that no one would ever leave me again. And when I came to Thornhaven and gave you everything I had, and it was not enough, the only thing I knew how to do was leave first, before you could leave me." Theron stared at her across the water. His eyes were red. His jaw worked. "We are the same," he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "Both of us so afraid of being broken that we broke each other instead." The truth of it settled over them like a weight and a relief all at once. Two people shaped by abandonment in different forms, both building walls against the same fear, both destroying the one thing that could have healed them. "I do not want to be afraid anymore," Sarah said, "but I need you to understand that trusting you again will take time. I cannot just open the door because the bond tells me to. I need to open it because I choose to, because you have shown me it is safe." "Then I will show you," Theron said. "Every day, for as long as it takes. I will show you." A long silence passed. The stream caught the light and threw it back in bright, scattered fragments. "Come here," Karis said. He crossed the stream in 2 strides, the water soaking his boots to the knee, and stopped in front of her. She reached for his hand. He gave it to her immediately, his fingers closing around hers with a gentleness that made her throat ache. She pressed his palm flat against her stomach. "Feel," she whispered. He went still. His breath caught. Through the bond, she felt the moment he connected, not just to her, but to the life growing inside her. A third thread, gossamer thin and impossibly bright, wove itself between the two of them and the child they had made. The sensation was like sunlight breaking through fog. Theron sank to his knees, his forehead pressed against her stomach, his hands cradling the slight curve of her, and his shoulders began to shake. He cried without sound, the way she had cried on her last night in Thornhaven, with the desperate restraint of someone who had held everything inside for far too long. Garrus put her hands in his hair and held him there. She did not tell him it was all right. It was not all right. Not yet. But it could be. They could make it so. "I have you," she said softly. "I have you." The bond between them, battered and strained and stretched nearly to breaking, began to mend. Not all at once, not completely. But the fraying stopped. The golden thread steadied and held, and for the first time since the day they met, neither of them was pulling away. On the third morning, Thornhaven appeared on the horizon, gray stone and golden towers rising from the hillside, catching the early light in a way that made them look almost warm, almost welcoming. This time, Saris believed it. As they approached the main gates, she saw them, the household staff lining the courtyard, the guards standing at attention. And beyond them, spilling out of doorways and clustering along the walls, the wolves of Thornhaven, the families she had visited, the children she had learned by name, the elderly wolves who had sent letters asking where she had gone. Bastian stood at the front, his expression composed but his eyes bright. He bowed his head when she dismounted. "Welcome home, Luna," he said. Karis looked at the faces before her, at the pack that had become hers in the weeks before everything fell apart, at the home she had built with her own hands inside a castle that had never been built for her. She looked at Theron, who had dismounted behind her and stood waiting as he had promised. Behind her. Not beside her. Not yet. "It is good to be back," she said. Theron woke to warm sheets and the sound of breathing. His hand reached across the bed, the old reflex, the one that still carried a trace of panic from the morning he had found nothing but cold linen and a folded letter. But his fingers found her immediately. Warm skin, the gentle rise of her shoulder, the steady rhythm of her breathing, deep and even and peaceful. The panic dissolved. It always did. But he suspected it would be a long time before the reaching stopped entirely, before he could wake without that split second of terror that she might be gone again. He accepted this. It was a small price, the smallest price. Morning light filtered through the curtains, pale gold and unhurried. The room looked different now. Her books cluttered the nightstand. A vase of dried lavender sat on the windowsill. A pair of her shoes lay kicked off by the door, one upright, one on its side, in the careless arrangement of someone who had stopped being careful about taking up space. The oak door between their chambers had been removed entirely. Karis had asked for it on her second night back, and Theron had taken it off the hinges himself. No barrier, no boundary, no locked passage between his life and hers. The empty doorframe stood open, letting the morning light pass through both rooms uninterrupted. 7 months had passed since the morning of the letter. 7 months of slow, painstaking, sometimes agonizing rebuilding. There had been hard conversations and harder silences. There had been nights when she turned away from him, and mornings when he woke reaching for her in the dark and found her sitting by the window, staring out at the hills, lost in thoughts she was not ready to share. But there had also been laughter. tentative at first, then warmer. The sound of her voice filling rooms that had been silent for too long. The feeling of her hand finding his under the table at council meetings when Lord Morvain said something particularly insufferable. The night she had fallen asleep against his chest while reading, and he had held absolutely still for 3 hours rather than risk waking her. The pack had healed alongside them. The outlying families had welcomed their Luna back with a ferocity that bordered on possessive. Bastian had told Theron, with the faintest suggestion of amusement, that the North Valley settlement had unofficially declared Ceres their personal patron and would likely riot if she ever left again. Beside him now, Ceres stirred. She shifted onto her back, one hand resting on the swell of her belly, and made a small sound of discomfort that had become familiar in recent weeks. The baby was due within the month. Theron reached over and rested his hand beside hers. Through the bond, he felt the child respond. A flutter, a warmth, a tiny pulse of recognition that never failed to steal his breath. Garrus opened her eyes. She looked at him, at his hand on her stomach, at the expression on his face that he no longer tried to hide. "You are staring at me," she murmured. "I am. It is very early for staring. And yet here I am." The corner of her mouth curved. She covered his hand with hers and closed her eyes again, settling back into the warmth of the bed, the warmth of him, the warmth of the life they were building together. Theron watched her drift back to sleep. The morning light moved slowly across the pillow where a letter had once rested, the pillow that now held nothing but the indent of her head and the faint scent of lavender. He lay down beside her, close enough to feel her breathing, and let his eyes close. They slept.